Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Behind the Frontline. My name is Nic Dampier, and I'm the creative director here, and I am your host. And I am joined in the studio today with Jimmy Nelson, who is our Director of Leadership and Organizational Development. Say hi, Jimmy.
Howdy.
And I'm also joined here with Ryan Williams, who is our Leadership and Team Development Manager. Say hi, Ryan.
Hey, everybody.
And today we are discussing bad leadership.
Yes, we are.
And we recently had a webinar that was widely attended. And I think if you haven't seen it yet, go to our website, www.frontlineon.com, webinars, watch that webinar because it is so packed full of information about the cost of bad leadership. So I was hoping to kick us off. When we talk about bad leadership, what do we actually mean? Are we talking about toxic behavior, lack of skills, or just a bad fit for the role?
That's a good question. I actually think it's all three or a combination of all three. And so what I would say is bad leadership is leadership that does not lead to the results that you're looking for. And that's really the bottom line. And the results that you're looking for is an engaged workforce who are doing their best work and love showing up every day and stay. So I think when you're looking at bad leadership, just our broad definition, it's any leadership that doesn't results in or doesn't have the outcome or the results that you're looking for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we also talk about the presence of good behaviors and the absence of good behaviors. I think it's interesting. We'll get into a question that kind of addresses that. I think sometimes we look at it as the absence of bad behaviors. It's like, oh, they're not doing anything negative. And that could be a lack of skill. Mm-hmm. That could also be bad motives. I'm in it for the wrong reasons, right? So all of those things. So absence of good behaviors, presence of bad behaviors, all of the above.
Yeah. And the other thing we talked about too is models. In the webinar, we talked a little bit about how that we are still hung for some reason up on models from the 1930s and 40s. We're still using a lot of the techniques that we used with people back then, and it's just not doable nowadays. The workforce is so different nowadays that leadership really is defined completely different than it was back then. Mm-hmm. So that's an important piece as well, is that sometimes we don't have good models. Like Ryan said, it's not necessarily the absence of bad, it's just we don't have a good model to say, oh, that's how we should be acting as a leader. So I think that's missing as well.
So when we think about that, and obviously, you know, generations are shifting some more. We know that Gen Alpha is going to be entering the workforce in the next 10 years, and things will look drastically different than it does right now. Why do you think so many organizations are waiting until there's damage? And maybe we can define what that damage is of bad leadership, but why do you think so many organizations are waiting until there's damage before addressing leadership gaps?
I think it's like most things when we initially look or feel some sort of pain, it's like, oh, I'll just wait and see. You know, it's like, I don't need to go to the doctor. It's just a runny nose. Mm-hmm. And then that runny nose starts to turn into a headache, and then that headache starts to turn into this and that. And then we finally go to the doctor when we feel like we're on our deathbed and I think it's like anything. We don't really address it until we feel the pain that costs us enough. Talk about pre-knowledge, where we don't know enough to know or catch those signs to be able to address it soon enough. I think that's really at the base of and then is the cost really worth it? You know, it's like, oh, they're telling me I need to do this, and this. It's like, oh, that's a lot. So, maybe we'll just wait and see.
Yeah. Well, I think the other part is handling bad leadership behavior is tough. First of all, we made a contract with this leader when we hired him and put him in a position that you're going to be a good leader. You're going to lead these people. You're going to run your team. You know, so we kind of made like a verbal contract saying you're going to be a great leader. Well, then if I have to address something that a leader's not doing well, or maybe, that's a difficult conversation. That's a courageous conversation I have to have. People don't like conflict. So it's like Ryan said, it's rather I'd like to close my eyes and just let them keep doing that because at least they're there than it is to step up and address that. And I think that's the hard part too, is that if I don't have what good leadership looks like defined, then how do I address it? If you don't know that you're supposed to act in this particular way, or you're not supposed to have high turnover, or you're not supposed to write people up just because they look different or whatever, then haven't defined that for you, then it's very hard for me to hold you accountable for that as well, because I can't have that conversation and say, oh, by the way, you're not acting right. And you say, well, you never told me I needed to do that. And so again, it makes it very difficult if you don't have some of those leadership things laid out ahead of time and ready, so that when issues occur or you're looking for good leaders, then you're ready for it. Yeah.
I really like what both of you said, having a good definition of what leadership is supposed to look like. And Ryan, even what you said about it got me thinking about like a culture of reactivity rather than proactivity. Maybe we could talk about that for a second, and how that is negatively impacting the future of your leadership and your bottom line.
Yeah, when we have clients reach out to us, it's typically, can you come fix this person?
Right.
And, we get into how they usually use a group approach when it's really one individual on the team that's particularly toxic to whatever it is. So there's that. I think it's all very reactive. In the same way, I have a runny nose. Oh, let me go get some medication, but I'm not going to change my eating habits. I'm not going to change,
Right.
all these other things that are leading to this. It's just let me put a Band-Aid on it. So it is. I think typically we have people not thinking about how do we create, and we talk about this in the webinar.
Yeah.
How do we create an environment that's sustainable around certain behaviors? How do we do that? Because doing this kind of reactive one by one person, depending on, now we do want to take an individual approach within a structure. If we don't create that structure, it just turns into everybody's opinions kind of getting swirled into this world of leadership, which is a very abstract concept to begin with. So it just turns into this abstract, like, oh, well, Jimmy said I wasn't doing very good a leader or whatever. And we're not connecting it to business metrics. We're not connecting it to anything connected to, it's just how people generally feel, which is important. But because we're not connecting it to business metrics and really, when Jimmy talked about success, we're just talking about, well, it's just not working. Okay, why? Well, it just isn't. So,
Yeah.
And so I think that's why we have reactivity, is because we haven't planned for success. We haven't really defined what success is. And so until you have that, it's just going to be what I call, and what a lot of organizations is, what's that? When they bring you into the hospital, the first thing is just to stabilize.
Triage.
Right? And then triaging bad leadership, like stop the bleeding.
Yeah.
And then we just get stuck in triage mode.
I think my question that pops into my head is not how do we take care of this bad leader, but like, how did we get here?
Yeah.
Right.
What happened? What are the steps that led up to this, and how can we avoid that from happening?
Yeah. Well, again, organizations a lot of times just assume that the leaders know how to lead, right? And so when I hire a manager or whatever, well, he's had experience in another organization. I'm bringing him into my organization to lead, so I'm assuming that he knows how to lead, without really any specifics around what does that mean in our culture for us. So how can we as an organization lay it out so that they know exactly what our expectations are? They exactly know what the leadership skills that they must have are. And then if they don't have some of them, even if they've been a leader for 22 years someplace else, then we can fill those gaps. But a lot of times it's just our assumptions that people have been leaders before at other companies. And so they're going to come in here and they're going to be a great leader without any definition.
Oh, that's so smart.
Yeah.
So we shared some pretty sobering stats during the webinar. So I was hoping you guys could, share some of what those are, like how much bad leadership can cost a company in productivity and turnover, like the fact that we're not putting this in our bottom line year in year. Can you share, an example from the webinar where leadership had a measurable impact, good or bad, on business outcomes?
Jimmy, I think the turnover numbers are typically, people don't really track that to begin with, or they do, but not in the sense of, we're not connecting it to how our managers or leaders are showing up. And I think you have that great aha moment that a leader had. Yeah.
Yeah. So we did a calculation using the calculator that Express has for a warehouse worker. And so for an $18 warehouse worker, we went through how much was recruiting cost, how much did it cost us, to refill the position, what was our cost for advertising and all that kind of stuff. And it came to $11,000, more than $11,000 for one warehouse worker. And so I shared that in a class with the company and a lot of their leaders. And one of the particular leaders said, really, I don't believe that because, my thing is if people don't do work really well, whatever, I just terminate them. So, geez. And so then I said, okay, great. Well, let's think about this. Here's $11,000. You work about 280 days a year. Your turnover is about one person a day. That's kind of where it's at. So not extreme, but one person a day. So do that math. Take 11,000 and multiply times 280 and tell me what you get. So he pulled his phone out and did the calculation and then just stared at his phone for a period of time because it's like $3.4 million. And then he said, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't be firing people so much.
Maybe.
So again, it's the idea that their job as leaders is if somebody's not doing well, just to get rid of them right away. And so turnover becomes horrible, and we're spending millions and millions of dollars. And here's the bad part about that. There's not a CFO or a CEO out there that sees that number. It is buried in human resources costs and payroll costs and everything else. But there is not a line item that says we turned over 280 people and here's how much it cost us to get that done. And if a CEO or CFO saw that number, yeah, they would implode. They would think, oh, $3.4 million to my bottom line? Just correct. And so I think some of the problem is that cost is hidden. So bad leadership is kind of hidden inside the organization as part of their normal funding process. And so, again, you talked about why we don't see this ahead of time. There's no indicators financially even whether this happens until somebody looks at a turnover number and it says they're at 33%. And then some CEO or CFO says, oh, that's way too high. But they still don't attach a dollar amount to it, and just knowing it's too high, or it's about industry average for the industry we're in, and they don't realize the numbers.
Yeah. So there might not be financial indicators, but what are some subtle signs just based on culture and behaviors that a leadership problem might be brewing before it becomes a full-blown issue?
Yeah.
I mean, pretty quickly when we have people in our training classes or we're working with a client, pretty quickly you get a sense of what people's beliefs are around who they should be and what their role and function should be within the organization. So the first brewing sign is when you have a conversation with somebody and they don't, we try to suss out, what do you understand the role and function is that you have as we use the term manager. Well, to get the job done. I was like, is that your job? Your job is to make sure the job gets done. Right. And you talk about the transition, watch the what new leaders should know and do is they need to know that their mindset has to shift from in this guy, his belief was, oh, they're not getting the job done. Well, my job isn't to develop them and get them to the level where they need to. As a new person who maybe has never worked in a warehouse, they're not going to be able to pick up this stuff probably at the pace. And especially somebody that was promoted because they're really good at their job. We'll harp on that forever. So the first telltale sign is, what is the mindset? And you can figure that out in asking quickly 3 questions. Yeah. What do you understand the role and function you have as a manager is? And depending on how they answer that question will give you the sense of, oh, there's a warning sign here because they see people as just running and doing their bidding and their main job is to get the job done, make sure the operation is working. Or do they see themselves as, I need to get my team, the people around me, to the level and make sure that they are working, and whether that's through support, having difficult conversations, whatever that is, I see that as my primary function. Yeah. I might be a working manager, but my primary function is to support and develop the people around me. That is if people don't have that mindset, we can work on skills, we can work on all that stuff to get them there. But if they don't have the want to, or if nobody has told them, hey, this is your role and function, you are primarily making a shift in job function and expectation. And then as an organization, we're not set up to support them in that new mindset and new role. So their measurements need to change. Like they can't produce the same level they have been now that they have all these other people that they're responsible to, because we have a lot of working managers out there. And so as an organization, we're not thinking about setting our managers up for success. We expect them to continue to produce or produce at the same level, if not more, while still being responsible to 20, 30 people, which is crazy even to begin with.
Yeah.
Well, and to add on top of that, most organizations have some kind of survey that they do, employee survey once a year, or they do a pulse survey or whatever. You'll hear a lot of comments straight from there. So that's a really quick indicator that your employees are not engaged. Your employees are not really feeling like they're just here for a paycheck. And I don't know how many leaders I ask, raise your hand if most of your employees are just here for a paycheck, and they raise their hand. And then I say to them, is that okay? And several of them say, well, yeah, sure. I need people like that too. And it's like, there's the mindset shift you're talking about, where they think their job is basically to just get work out instead of transitioning into that leadership role. So that's one of the big indicators that I like to have companies do, is some kind of employee survey or pulse to say, what are the employees saying? Obviously, you can look at turnover and efficiencies and the rest of those things, but I think a little deeper dive is what Ryan was talking about, and maybe even looking at employees and what kind of perspective they have of what's going on.
Yeah. So let's say they do some sort of employee annual survey and they get some of this data, and not all companies are fortunate enough to work with a company like ours yet, Frontline Training Solutions, to give them a good roadmap on where to go with that. Let's say, what are some things that they could do, with that information? Like, we talked about turnover costs, we talked about putting that on their, line item, but what are some things that they could do tomorrow if they got the news today that their employees aren't engaged and they might have a toxic leadership problem?
Yeah, I think the easiest thing and it's a no cost kind of thing or a very low cost kind of thing, is for them to actually sit down as a leadership group, maybe an executive leadership group, have human resources in there, maybe have some of the supervisors or the managers in there, and then have a discussion of what are the 5 or 6 things that are expectations. So you can make them words, you can make them whatever, and then define them, and not just definition you throw up on the wall. This is real life, real in our culture, in our organization. What does success look like as a supervisor? And then laying that out specifically so everybody in the room agrees to it. Yep, that's going to be our goal. Then again, pretty much free, is then set a metric around that and say, how are we going to know if Nic is doing this particular, integrity or whatever it happens to be? How are we going to know that's happening? Well, and then so coming up with a metric. I think that foundationally gets them started down the path that they need to go when it comes to really having leaders who understand what's expected of me, what I'm supposed to do, and then how am I going to be measured against that expectation? I think a lot of times organizations put those words together. We want them to be competent, we want them to have integrity, and we want them to be supportive and all these kinds of things, but then never define it and never have a metric. And so his opinion of me being supportive and your opinion of me being supportive, since both of you work for me, are completely different. So who do you believe? So again, I think that's a low cost, easy thing to do. Obviously if they need help, excuse me, with that, we can help them kind of lay that out, because we've done competencies and those leadership competencies before. But that's something that they could do internally with just some facilitation to get to the level where they're actually laying out, here's what success looks like for a leader, and here's how we're going to measure it.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when he says define, I would emphasize behaviors.
Yeah.
So we like behavior language. Behaviors are measurable. They're visible. It will crystallize things for our leaders, our managers. The other piece is, what you really, okay, so you notice you have a problem. Okay. I'm talking to the HR generalist who's listening to this podcast. Okay. You see the problem. Does everybody else? You need to start strategizing yourself to think about, how do I help everyone else see the problem? Who are my key stakeholders? Do they see the problem? That's where your turnover numbers, those need to be on the desk in front of your CEO on a weekly, monthly, however, whatever your reporting structures are. Who are your key stakeholders that if they're not bought in, you think about change management principles, you look into the process of the first thing is we have to agree there's a problem. We need to all agree there's a problem. Then we can start talking about the solutions. And that's where, it's like, okay, then we start thinking about, how do we get in a room and define the behaviors that we expect? And not everyone I would caution you just to pull a list off the internet because every and I would caution you not to come up with a list of 30 things.
No.
This is where we can definitely help you, and you'd be surprised, excuse me, as how little it would cost you to have an organization like us come in and actually, well, I shouldn't say, I don't know how much other organizations charge, but how little it costs you for some help in this area to really sit down and zero in and kind of have some wisdom in not only the defining but the buy-in process.
Yeah, that's right.
Because
Yeah.
it means nothing, just like our values. It means nothing to put those up on a wall or put it down on a piece of paper. It means everything to go, who needs to be bought into this? Because unless we get that, unless we create that momentum, it'll be like, our value statements that sit on a wall and no one does anything with.
And again, looking at numbers, if you were talking about numbers earlier and that kind of stuff, the DoD did a big study and found out there was $80,000+ to replace one manager. And so again, if I'm thinking
That's
about
how much the manager was costing them.
what cost it, yeah, it was costing them because of bad leadership. And so if you think about that for a minute, one meeting where you sit down and actually define this out, and then a series of other meetings where you actually get buy-in. I mean, $80,000. I mean, it takes a long time before you get to that kind of money, and that's one person, one bad leader in an organization.
If they got multiple turnovers,
Yeah, man.
cost to cost, like it definitely makes sense to invest in that
again,
strategy now.
The cool part about all that is it makes managing leaders, it makes human resources' job so much easier when they have it defined. Because now it's not some nebulous, like, well, you should be doing this with your people. It's defined and the metrics are there available for them so that they can lay it out. And again, this doesn't have to be some gigantic, it's 5 or 6 items that are focused specifically, like Ryan said, on behaviors that tell me what a good leader looks like. And then I'm held accountable for that.
Something I think, and we didn't mention, I wanted to bring up during the webinar, but a lot of people are reporting that the younger generation are, maybe not just younger, a lot of people are opting out of management or leadership. And I think it's because we're asking them to fall into this new kind of leadership. It used to be the command and control. Well, you talk about the old models, that's easy.
It is.
I don't need to manage my emotions. I don't need to consider how the other person is going to take what I'm saying. I can just say it, you do it. That's easy. That doesn't require a whole lot of thoughtfulness on my end. So yeah, sure, I'll be a manager. You're going to pay me like 30% more. I'll happily just tell people what to do. Yeah, why not? And I get like the respect and the prestige. And now we're telling people, well, actually, it doesn't come with a whole lot of respect and prestige anymore because no one really respects you that way.
Right.
We're also telling you have to have a lot of emotional intelligence and consider what you say. You got to think about, lawsuits and all these different things. How much pay am I getting for this? Like, that there's that value opportunity, kind of equation that you're doing in your head that you're like, oh, I don't know. No wonder we're watching people go, I don't know. There's this new style of leadership and you want me to be good at 30 different things, like all of this stuff, some nebulous idea of what a great leader looks like. Of course, I don't want to do that. That's too much. Just let me do my job.
Yeah.
So we're seeing a lot of organizations reporting that people are opting out of stepping into management roles. So I think this is also a piece of you zero it in and you drill it down to say, listen, you don't have to be necessarily at this function and role within your organization. You don't have to be this great strategic thinker. We just need you to do these five things as a manager.
Yeah.
And maybe strategic thinking is maybe another level in an organization that you have people that are more in that kind of thinking, then that's another layer. So that's an operations leader or above has to be a strategic thinker. But as a frontline leader, you don't necessarily need to have strategy as a core behavior or skill.
And one thing I think we didn't talk a lot about in the webinar, we did touch on a little bit, but having 2 different paths. Everybody is not going to be a great leader. I'm sorry. Some people just don't have the skills that they need or the abilities they need. Now, some of it we can teach, but again, back to what Ryan was talking about, there is a mindset piece of that. But if you think about it, if I want to move up, if I want to get more money, where do I have to go? Well, my next level after I'm a worker for a period of time is supervision. And so if that's my only path, then that's the only path that I can take. And that's the one I do take because I want more money and I want to move up. Where in reality, we really need to be thinking about a different path. So let's say we've got a great welder out there who's been doing welding for 20 years. We promote him into a supervisor position. He's terrible at it because he doesn't want to do it and doesn't have the skill. We end up terminating him. What we just lost? Just lost a leader, and we just lost a great welder.
Experience. Yeah.
Why not have a second path where more technical people can still move up financially, but not into that leadership role? And I think that's a more difficult conversation to have because then it changes the normal structure of organizations. But I think it definitely will. If I lay out exactly the 6 things that it takes to be a great supervisor, and then I evaluate candidates based on that, then I'm going to be able to be much more selective in who gets in leadership. And then therefore I'll have an easier time managing those leaders because they already have the mindset and some of the skills, etc. So the idea here is, we can do training all day long, but if the person doesn't want to be there, doesn't want to be in leadership, they just simply got promoted because they were this next one in line, then it creates difficulties. Actually worked for an engineering company one time where the guy who did international logistics had 4 different logistics people working for him. So went over and said, okay, we're ready to do performance evaluations. And he's like, oh, I don't do those. I said, I'm sorry, you have 4 people that report to you. He said, yeah, I'll let them do their own. I really don't want to be in this leadership thing. I just want to do international shipping. Yet he had been there for 30 years and they had just slowly but surely moved him up to manager and then director. And again, he didn't even want to do the position. So how good of it? How good was he at doing it? Probably not at all. And his people felt that as well. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
You guys are dropping a lot of truth bombs right now. So I want to pivot for a second and talk about some of the questions that we received live in the webinar. One that really stood out was, we don't necessarily have bad leaders, but I'm not sure we have really good ones either. So how do we make the case for investing in leadership development when everything is just kind of fine?
Yeah. That's a harder case.
How do you make the case? Well, I think we were talking about this once we read that question, is like, how do you know you have okay leaders?
Yeah. How do you
Like
know
what's
your metric?
What's your metric? Like, how do you, it sounds like that's maybe a general sense or feel, which is often what we go by. And maybe you've done employee, satisfaction surveys and things like that. And it's just been kind of average. Okay. I mean, if it's giving you the result you want, then I guess you could stay there.
Yeah, and I would challenge you one step further. Say, really, okay is okay with you? Just having leaders that you think are okay is doing right? Yeah, let's improve. Come on, man. So there is a level there where you say, what kind of organization do I want? Do I want people working in an organization that really has great leaders and they want to come to work? They wake up Monday morning after Sunday and say, yep, I'm going in. Or do I want one where my turnover's kind of hitting industry average and we're kind of okay in efficiencies? So I think it comes down to that as well. As an organization, what do you want out of your leaders? I think oftentimes what people don't realize about that is that by them just accepting what they have as leaders and not actually investing in people and demonstrating that the company can be so much better, is they don't know what they don't know. And so I would suggest benchmarking some of the great companies that they value, or maybe customers that they have that are doing really great, and saying, what do your leaders do? What do you hold them accountable for? And then maybe, again, at a very low cost, if any cost at all, begin to think about, well, what does a great leader look like in our organization? And getting those people involved in setting those standards. Yeah.
I think with that, if business is just fine and there's not a lot of stress in that area, I think we typically kind of go, oh, well, yeah, we're fine, and like turnover's not hard. But like the second we get more competition into the playing field, the second we hit recession, whatever that is, whatever those challenges, I think we start to watch that status quo leadership piece start to fall apart for us, and it becomes more of a risk than an asset. And so because when you look at organizations, one of the statistics we talked about is really does affect not only your bottom line as far as loss and risk, also effectiveness as an organization, just what Jimmy was talking about around innovation and where you're positioning yourself in the market. And so that's what I would start to think about. Okay, if you're trying to make a case to go, well, we're fine now because everything's kind of fine.
Yeah.
But let's do a SWOT analysis around what are our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats around leadership, and is that setting us up in the market in the way that we want to be? Bring it back to strategic business decision making, not like I generally feel like we're fine.
And again, investigating a little bit farther to say, well, you had some turnover, right? So how much is that costing you? And if we didn't have that turnover, what kind of investments could we make? So back to what Ryan talked about a little bit, being a little proactive when it comes to this and thinking, I need really good leaders for that next new product I'm introducing. And so maybe we should spend some money up front, making sure we're prepared when that happens. Or maybe we're going to have a merger acquisition. That happens a lot. And so somebody buys your company. Are you ready, leadership wise? Are you ready, and company wise, to tell them, look, this is our standard. Here's how we train our leaders so that they're ready to do this kind of stuff. And so then the new company thinks, wow, well, that's different. Yeah, let's use their leaders. So again, being proactive, I think, helps. And then making the case, even of your current numbers, what are they really? Look at your turnover factually, and then see what that number really represents. I think a lot of people would go from, oh, we're doing okay, to, oh, that's how much that's costing us. And then they would do something about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's other factors other than leadership that drive turnover. Sure. What you're looking for
it's inevitable.
It's inevitable. There's lots of different factors, but like one of the statistics we talked about was, 80% of the people, that's going to be one of their primary factors around choosing to stay with an organization or leaving. Something we didn't talk about too is how many people, and there'd be interesting numbers. I've not actually looked into this. I just from just hearing stories of people saying, yeah, I left my organization to follow my leader. And so if
That's
you,
interesting.
yeah, I mean, think about it. I'm sure if you're listening to this podcast, you probably have heard stories, or you yourself have said, yeah, my old boss who left my organization, I just loved them. They were just amazing. And then they reached out to me and said, hey, would you consider coming and working for this place? So we talk about regrettable turnover versus non-regrettable turnover. People who it's like, oh, they chose to leave, and thankful that they chose to leave themselves. So it's regrettable versus non-regrettable turnover. And so I think those are different lenses you want to look at this through to go, man, how much is leadership a factor? Exit interviews can be helpful. I know people have mixed feelings on those. Stay interviews is another one. Is like, what would cause you to want to leave if you're considering it? Trying to get honest as much as you can, get honest feedback from people. So just things to think about if you're trying to build a case for this.
Wow. Yeah, I like what you guys said about, sometimes it's inevitable, and just kind of identifying the different factors around that.
Yeah.
Well, and the cool part about it, again, is if I'm somebody who is answering that question, hey, you want to follow me over to this another company, and the leadership that my current company is kind of undefined. I'm not really sure. Sometimes it's chaos, sometimes it's not. And I'm moving to an organization where I have a boss who I know knows how to define leadership and knows how to put me in a place where I can be successful, I may move. But if instead the company's been proactive and I know exactly what I'm held accountable for, and I'm knocking it out of the park, and people are looking at me and saying, wow, you're a really great leader, so maybe I'll stay. And so maybe I'll tell my old boss, well, you know what, I'm doing really good here. And so again, a lot of that is just, do I have the definition of how I can be a successful leader, and do I have a good model to follow, and am I held accountable for something that I can know what the metric is? And like Ryan said, too often it's so fuzzy that it's just somebody's opinion that you're not doing really well as a leader, where this gives us some structure.
Really love that. Let's say that there's someone listening to this. Maybe it's a HR professional or a business leader, maybe someone even at the table, executive table. What is one thing that you would challenge them to consider or assess, or something they could do to improve the leadership in their organization? this week?
Well, that's a good question.
Yeah.
I don't know if that came offline or not, but that's a really good question. Oftentimes I think the first thing that I suggest, especially for executive leaders, is taking a look in the mirror. Right. First, they're the ones who set the tone. They're the ones who create the environment. They're the ones who set policy in place. So you need to look in the mirror and say, how are we as an executive team, and what are we modeling? What is our leadership model? So I think they could do that this week and have a really frank conversation with themselves to say, is what we're doing and what we're showing actually what we expect our leaders to do? So I think that's a great place to start.
That's great.
Yeah.
What about you?
One thing they could do this week, and so I'm talking to an HR person or a leader with an organization, maybe a decision maker or key stakeholder in an organization. I think I'd go one. I'd just reiterate Jimmy's points. Every leader within your organization is going to ask, why isn't my boss doing this?
They ask that all the time in training.
Second that we start to talk about leadership, they're going to want to know why this isn't being demonstrated by their next level up. So one thing you could do this week, well, I guess it depends on where you're at kind of in this process. I think getting started in some way, but pace yourself. These changes do not happen in a week. Pace yourself. Think about a plan. Create a plan and a desired outcome.
Yeah.
These do not happen in a week. I think too often we get a sense of people get urgent about these things and they feel the pain in the moment. And then maybe they quell that pain. They got the bring back the runny nose analogy. They got the medicine, and then it's like suddenly that dissipates, that urgency dissipates. And then they didn't really create a plan. They just looked for a solution, a quick solution. So create a plan right now. Like think through what are the steps. We kind of laid that out in the webinar.
We did, yeah.
So check that out if you haven't watched it, but create a plan and think about what's my desired outcome. That can change, but lay it out. Lay it out, because just know this isn't going to happen in a week.
Well, the other thing, I think they can start this week, and I don't know if it's going to be something they can actually do, but begin to collect data.
Yeah.
Right. Because I want to make this decision whether I'm going to, have my leaders developed or not, or whether I'm going to do a training class or a coaching. Let's collect some data. If you're an HR professional, you got tons of data. You got exit interviews, you got turnover rates, all those kind of. But even if you're the CFO or CEO and you're thinking, geez, how do I transition my company so that begin to collect some data, ask for some data. What is our employee opinion survey results? What does it come out? How are we? And don't just say how are we against industry standard, but how are we against what our expectations are? And then look at turnover data, look at cost of recruiting, talk to the recruiters and find out how much it costs to put an ad on LinkedIn and how many do they do in a year. So again, begin to collect that information, especially if you're a HR person and you've got to kind of convince that executive staff of this training. Give them some data to base it on. Give them some business-oriented data to say, this is how much it's costing our bottom line. Here's the percentage of costs that we pay out of our budget for these particular activities. I think that's another good thing to start with as well.
And if you're not the CEO, I'm speaking more from experience. I don't know if there's data on this to talk data, but from experience, to be honest with you, unless you get the CEO and it becomes a steadfast heartbeat of the CEO that this stuff is critical, you're pretty much just throwing sand in the wind at that point. To be honest with you, unless you get the CEO coming at and saying, this is a mission critical function of our organization that we need to consider an overhaul or drill down into what this means for our organization, and they're steadfast on that idea, it typically tends to be a kind of sporadic, okay, let's do this thing, and then it fizzles out.
And you'd say the best way to do that is to show the cost.
100% data is going to be the
That is going to help.
Put it as a line item.
And I've seen it happen before where if you're not the CEO or on the executive staff and you want to convince them and that kind of stuff, sometimes the proof's in the pudding. Sometimes if you put together a really good plan, like Ryan was talking about, and you lay out exactly expectations and metrics and do that, and then you conduct a training so that you can get your leaders up to that, and then the CEO begins to see differences.
They catch on even.
Yeah, they're like, wait a minute, what's happening over there? I know I did a training class for an organization I worked with for a while, and once the training class was over, I had the other managers come in and watch the final presentation, and then all of them went running back to the CEO and said, wow, you should have seen that. That was this word. And so he came over to me and said, hey, I want more of that. Right. And so you can do ground up just as well as doing the other. But again, it really takes a lot more effort going that way than it does if you can get the CEO on board. But both ways work. I've seen it work both ways.
Yeah, I would emphasize that, not to say that don't try anything. Like, like, hey, if you can get
throw
some different
sand in the wind, right?
If you can get some training initiatives or different, watch the webinar. We talk about Hill, Skill, Will, and analyzing what the real issue is or whatever. And training is a key component of this, giving people skills and awareness and whatever. Obviously, that's why we're in the business we're in. But we have seen this, and we're watching this happen with a couple organizations that we're working with right now. Yeah. It's like the CEOs didn't really know what was happening, but they're suddenly hearing stuff through the grapevine, and they're going, oh, wow, we don't really have a shared definition of what it means to be a leader. Like, we don't have a shared language, and we're starting to realize people starting to get that. And now we're like, hey, we want to be a part of this, and we need to start having different conversations. And so maybe that's your plan. Maybe that's part of your plan of like, let me get some wins. Let me get some wins. But again, track the data with the wins. So then you can go, hey, we did this thing. We did a small cohort. Here was the impact that we saw. What do you think about doing this on a bigger scale?
Yeah. All the advice you're giving right now is so smart. It reminds me of a quote that I heard John Kuning say one time, who is our director of manufacturing training and, pilot of one of our, signature programs, Supervisor Boot Camp. And he said, he gets the question sometimes of when's the best time to start? And he said, 20 years ago. Like, of course, the second best time to start is right now. It's probably, as we know, Rome wasn't built in a day, right? So it's going to take some time, but making those little steps now is going to help you later in the long run, right?
Getting wins, proof of concept, proof of
with data.
So you need to be tracking. Here was our desired outcome. Here's what we were going after, and we can help you with that. We can help you develop a plan. I think there's maybe some people are sitting there going, where do I even begin? I don't know. Okay, and that's what give your ball. We will do a free conversation. We'll go, here's kind of what our recommendation is. What do you think? Kind of thing that doesn't cost you anything. So give us a call if you're like a little lost here.
Well, and we've seen a wide variety. I mean, inside organizations as consultants, we've seen a wide variety of different things that work and some that don't. So that guidance, I think, is really what we offer and something that we can provide, even if it's just a phone call, like Ryan said, and we just kind of give you some advice on what you're thinking about. I think that's where it really starts, is thinking about that and laying out a plan of action, saying, here's the direction we want to go. And then again, looking for people like us who can actually help them walk them through that process.
And I think what's so interesting too is that our team is just packed full of trainers and consultants who are not just bookworms who learn about these things from other people, but they've been in these shoes.
That's correct.
They've learned these lessons the hard way. They know what they are talking about, what works and what doesn't work. And I think the unifying mission that we all resonate with and we're passionate about is that we want to help businesses and companies thrive by developing people, inspiring growth, and unlocking potential. That's what we're all about. So like Ryan and Jimmy said, give us a call. We want to help you with this. You're not alone. This is not a big, daunting storm that's coming on the horizon. This is something that you can make measurable steps right now, tracking the progress and making some huge wins down the line. So thanks, guys, so much for joining me in the studio. Go watch the webinar, The Cost of Bad Leadership. I'll make sure we link it in the caption below. Until next time, see you on the front line. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.